Welcome to another episode of the Apex Perspective podcast. Today I have Neil Sahota, who is currently the Chief AI Officer at LoanDNA. Now, Neil started off in management consulting and subsequently led at the executive level of multiple companies, including leading as at IBM specifically, leading as worldwide business development leader, and of course now is leading as Chief AI Officer at LoanDNA. But Neil, can I hear from your perspective? Can you tell me a little bit more about your background, how it led you to what you're doing today?
It's a great question, Aaron. I honestly not sure, but
Mm-hmm.
people ask me that question. I think there's a couple of things that really shaped who I am. One is I really locked in that question. Every parent hates their child learning, which is why.
Mm-hmm.
I'm almost kind of curious and wondering, things like even growing up in the Bronx next to Yankee Stadium. I remember asking as a little kid, like, why are they called the Yankees?
Mm-hmm.
People just kind of look at me like, well, that's always been their name, or Yankees was a reference to people in the colonies back in the day. And I actually did look it up. Went to the library. There was no internet back in those days, at least not
Mm-hmm.
accessible to the people. And I actually learned that the Yankees were actually called the New York Highlanders, but the reporters thought the name was way too long. It couldn't fit into a headline, so they wanted to
Mm-hmm.
come up with a shorter name. So they started calling them the Yanks, right? Because that fits a lot easier. And
Right.
so they became the Yankees that way. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of interesting, right? But I keep asking those questions like, why? And I've been fortunate enough to travel around, see different cultures, experience things differently. Like I remember the first time going to Europe again, small child, wondering like, why does their traffic light system work differently
Mm-hmm.
than the way ours does, right? Like before it goes, we go red to green, they actually go red to blinking yellow to green. And I'm like, I wonder why they do that. So that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuck with me throughout my life, inquisitive. The second thing is I'm the guy that likes to pick the path of most resistance, which is the
Mm-hmm.
opposite of what most people do, because I
Yeah.
like to learn. I think that ties in with the why. I remember like even
Mm-hmm.
in college, I would take the upper ocean classes that were the hardest that nobody else wanted to take, but that was because I wanted to learn. And I
Yeah.
did learn a lot. And I think that's what's really kind of molded me in my career is not just the being inquisitive and wanting to learn and understand, but then to figure out is there a better way of doing something.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I would absolutely agree with understanding that why. In fact, my entire TED talk was based on the title of my TED talk is Find Your Why. I think understanding why certain things happen gives you definitely a broader view and stronger understanding as to why certain mechanisms exist, how they operate, and asking why gets you to basically understand topics and ideas much more deeper, and then you can see and draw parallels to other different things. So I really appreciate that perspective. Now, when you started off your career and you were doing more management consulting, what I'm curious about is I especially saw that you have a global perspective, working at traveling around the world. And I have a question about that specifically. How do you think traveling the world kind of shaped you as a leader, specifically in how you lead in business?
You really help me understand the importance of culture.
Hmm.
And this is the squishy, fuzzy thing that people struggle around. And
Hmm.
there's a difference between management and leadership. We tend to confuse the two. The
Hmm.
managers, they're responsible for a set of work, day-to-day operations, making sure these tasks get done.
Execution.
Exactly, right? But leaders, they're more visionaries, right? They're thinking
Yes.
more, what those big term fuzzy type of goals, and they don't necessarily have to be managers, but they have the charisma and the not the authoritative leadership, but we call referent leadership, and that people want to follow
Hmm.
them because they believe in what they're saying and the goals they're trying to achieve.
Hmm.
And what I've learned is that to be a good leader, you have to really understand and build culture.
Hmm.
And I know that you hear a lot about this, and that like Mark Cuban talks a lot about it on Shark Tank, for example.
Right.
But it's a very people-oriented and difficult thing to do. It's time-consuming.
Hmm.
But I've been to 108 countries now, and I've
Hmm.
you know been very immersed in most of them. And I just learned that people have today have different traditions, different modes of thinking, different way of doing things, because that's kind of shaped generations after generations of how that community developed. And
Hmm.
what I find is a lot of people when they travel somewhere else, they keep comparing it to what they know. And so if all you ever do is seek out the differences, you don't really try to understand the culture and why the way they are. And I found that if you try to understand the culture, you not just didn't fit in much better, you actually develop more deeper relationships. You actually will start understanding what's going to work and not work. I remember, working with Starbucks, and they were trying to get back into the Chinese market, and they had spent time living in China. They're thinking like, hey, we're this, big chain. A lot of people know us, not so much in China back then, but they sell an Italian barista experience. At the time, most people in China didn't know what an Italian barista was. So it was a big thing. And they tried to open up their first store in the Forbidden City, which is big cultural meaning for Chinese people. And it's like faux pas after faux pas after faux pas. And it wasn't until we kind of reoriented and said, hey, look, they're not going to be familiar with the Italian barista experience, but they're curious about the American experience. And right now, at that time, not big coffee drinkers, but big tea drinkers, right? So a lot more customization, cultural orientation, but that gave them the foundation to be successful in China.
Right. And this is an excellent point, because I've actually interviewed many investment bankers and studying the idea of mergers and acquisitions. One of the biggest problems you can see as a reason for an unsuccessful merger is due to the fact that there's a clash of culture. And if there's a leader who's capable of understanding these different mechanisms of different cultures, how they operate, and respecting that along the process, that's the difference between having a successful merger and having an unsuccessful merger. So I think that point is absolutely amazing, and especially given your experience. Now, something else that was very compelling in regards to the work you've been doing at IBM specifically is creating new market segments. And what I was really curious about was understanding the process behind that and how that's even possible.
Well, that's probably the first. I shouldn't say that. That's probably the most challenging, is what we call FOAKs, first of a kinds. Because what we're really doing is we're trying to create a new set of needs. It's hard to have a traditional value proposition. And so you have to help people understand the potential first to trigger then the possibility and the needs. And that's where people struggle. As much as we like to say we want innovative thinkers, we don't teach people how to actually do that. And so, if you don't connect those dots, it's not going to work. But the thing is, you can't just connect the dots for them, because then that's what they always expect. You have to actually teach them how to connect the dots, and that's how you actually develop these new needs. So you want to create a new market. It's almost like you have to lead the horse to water, to be cliche, and kind of nudge them into drinking.
So you basically, what's interesting about that is you're not connecting the dot. You're not telling them what to do, but you're leading them in the correct direction. So what's interesting in sales, and what I've learned some ideas about sales and from people who've been on this podcast before, is asking the right questions so the individual themselves are able to identify the solution by themselves. So what you're saying, from what I'm understanding, is not telling them, but rather showing them the correct direction, and they come to the conclusion themselves. Is that what you're saying here?
It is, right? But there's a belief aspect to this. To give you an example, you talked about like marketing and sales. What's the best way to sell to somebody? It's the best way to market to somebody. And that's really if you know the person as well as the best friend does, right? Because then you can speak their language, know the right triggers. Yeah. But there's no way to know people like that, especially if you're doing consumer marketing. But we have all these tools and technologies now that you can actually do that. And so everyone's first reaction is, okay, the new technology, I'll see what I can automate of my current process. Well, that's not thinking differently. You can teach AI psychology, you can teach AI neurolinguistics. And so it can actually learn people just off social media posts or a few emails, their personality traits, their opinions, the triggers, the things they care about. Like this person's going to care more about the wow and jazz factor of the product, while this person's going to care more about the utility and the value that they get from it. And so you actually have the ability to speak like they're their best friend. But a lot of people just don't believe it's possible. They're like, if a human can't really do that, how can a machine do it? But then the people that are kind of the first movers on and try it, they've seen a 300% increase in conversion rates. And then they're like, wow, I wish we could have been doing this forever. But that's the thing is I hate to say it this way, some people are going to jump in, be the first ones, the leaders, and the rest will then follow in. That's what triggers
Mhm.
that belief.
Right, right. So now a question from a more broader point of view before we get into AI specifically, which is going to be very, very important part of this conversation. When you approach leading at the executive level at companies, as you've done as a board member and as a board director multiple times, and as chief executive officer, what are some principles potentially or traits you bring to every organization in terms of leadership, irrespective of where you go?
Well, it's an interesting question because it's hard to teach leadership.
Right.
It's a more hands-on than conceptual learning, which is why I know that
Hmm.
a lot of students in schools, especially universities, struggle with some of this stuff. But they always say lead by example. That's really the best way to teach. And so, you know, working with executives, it's funny because this just happened recently. Is I don't speak up a lot initially, like in the conversation or stuff, unless I have like a really burning question, but I
Hmm.
listen. And I let people
Okay.
go, I let people share ideas. I remember the CEO was just like, came afterwards, like, Neil, I feel like you don't really contribute much. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, you kind of sit there and listen a lot, and you might ask a couple of questions, and they're great questions, but I was expecting you to reject more, tell people like these are the three things they should be doing. And I'm like, well, a good leader sets expectations and
Hmm.
helps people, figure or lets people figure out the best path to accomplish those goals.
Right.
And if they get stuck, the leader should help either provide resources or remove some of those barriers. That's the job. Because
Hmm.
it's not enough to just tell people what to do. You need their buy-in, especially if you're trying something new. And it's
Hmm.
such a different way of thinking because they came up from a very more management type of background,
Hmm.
but they kind of underscored the value of people and the value of culture. And
Hmm.
I remember the CEO was trying to push through this thing with his own C-suite team. I said, what, why don't you just try it? See what I do, right? And just copy that. I hate to say it, I just copy it and see what happens. And we talked 3 days later, and he's like, most of the C-suite's on board with this idea now because he's like, they've been
Interesting.
talking through it. They started feeling like they were part of the process. They're helping to shape this. It's kind of the
Mhm.
IKEA effect because now they feel like they're helping to build something. They value it more.
Right, right. And that's actually a really key point. So if you want a specific direction in terms of a company and specifically an idea, is for most of what I'm understanding here, it's really leading them in the correct direction. I think telling someone that they need to do something is completely different than involving them in the process, or at least making them feel like they're involved in the process. Those are two completely different things. So that's a really good point you're making there. Now, as far as AI goes, I think this is something that I've seen in terms of LinkedIn, at least at ACSI Labs. That's where I started seeing a bit more of the AI involvement in leadership. So tell me a little bit more about that transition into taking AI a bit more seriously when it comes to leadership and when that started happening for you.
Well, it really started when I first started working on AI like 20 years ago.
Okay.
That was more so because we were concerned about the fear factor.
Okay.
And back then, it wasn't so much about fear of losing jobs. It was people thought it'd be Terminator time. AI is going to rise up, conquer the world, eradicate humanity. And so we wanted to make it very passive, really de-anthropomorphized it. We're doing all these things, but we knew that this is not going to be just about is AI going to take jobs or not. In the future, and for us now today, it's a very new future. In some cases, it's already here. Is you're
Mhm.
going to be leading or managing AI employees. You're going to have
Yeah.
human employees working with AI employees, and in the near future, and we're actually seeing some of this already in customer service, you might have an AI manager. And so,
Right.
how does that dynamic actually work, and how do you lead? Because with the AI, you just tell it this is the goal we want to accomplish. They're going to like, okay, right?
Hmm.
But what I found is for a lot of folks, they don't explain what they're trying to accomplish. Again, they're trying to give a directive, do this task, right? Drop this email, create a meeting agenda. It's very task oriented. Whereas if you say like, hey, you know what, we're going to have this meeting because we need to get marketing and engineering on board to this new product we want to develop for the South American market. The
Hmm.
more context you actually give it, the better or the more value it'll create through
Of course.
graph generation.
Right.
And so it's almost like talking to a person. And then you have the dynamic of people especially freak out about their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get them to actually work without undermining or sabotaging the AI interns or employees today?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a whole different kind of mode of thinking because it's more culture and people oriented now.
Right. Right.
And I had the opportunity to work with a few other people and contribute to a book called Innovative Leadership in the Age of AI, where
Mm-hmm.
we lay out some of these frameworks and some of these best practices. But I can look and say the way leadership worked in the 90s was very different than the 2000s, which was different than the 2010s, which is different today. I mean, by 2030, it's going to look very different.
Right. And as Chief AI Officer right now, you are working on these AI transformations, AI strategies for the enterprises. So the question for you is really about AI transformation itself, actually. As maybe you've seen, I've interviewed a lot of people on digital transformation specifically, which itself has a low success rate, about 33%, often due to a lack of stakeholder engagement in the process. But when it comes to AI transformation specifically, you could see some individuals or employees being a bit more resistant to that change. So how do you approach, or what's your thinking process behind applying an AI transformation, as we've seen the lower success rates of digital transformations themselves?
It's a great question, Aaron. There's a lot of factors here, but I'll stick to the top three.
Sure.
So number three, you're spot on. You have to get the people on board. And this is what blows my mind, because throughout my entire career, I've seen this. Forget about AI. Is we tell people to do this set of work or this project. We never explain why we're doing it and the value they'll actually get. What we call the WIFA, what's in it for me. And that's the big thing. It's like we're going to roll out this AI tool and stuff, and people freak out. But we don't tell them, like, well, those reports you hate, writing every week that take 2 hours of your time. With this tool, not only take you 10 minutes, right?
Right.
Suddenly you're showing them the WIFM. No, okay, wait a second, that sounds pretty good, right? I don't do this tedious work. And we just fail as managers and leaders at doing that. And so we have to get better, especially as things are accelerating thanks to AI. Number two, one of the big things we have is that we're so focused on what's the right tool, the right API, what's the right product, and we're listening to vendors. We're not actually looking at systems that learn, right? Especially with Gen AI. And Gen AI has good usage, but people are trying to force fit into everything, and that's not the right thing. The power of AI is it has the ability to learn and get better, but I see this from a lot of, I don't understand AI, I understand technology. We don't have a lot of people in house that do that. We'll listen to these consultants, or we'll listen to these vendors who often don't know, or because you don't code AI, you teach it, they don't have people that actually know your domain or your industry and can't properly teach it to begin with. It's a big driver. But the number one reason I see these transformations fail to yield meaningful value is that leadership treats AI as software rather than high energy intern, right? They think, like, I'm buying a piece of software, it's all good to go. And it's like, no, you're hiring a person, right? That intern you're hiring, that AI intern you're hiring, you have to teach it. You have to teach your data, your business processes, your goals, right? You wouldn't just hire a human intern and say, go do this stuff unsupervised, right? And that's effectively what they're doing with AI.
Right.
So to get real value,
wrong expectation.
You have to teach. You have to go in the right ideas that, every AI solution requires a level of customization, and that's the teaching aspect.
Right. And this leads me to a different question that is highly relevant to AI transformation, which is the difference between adopting AI because it's a trend, which a large contingent of companies do, versus understanding the exact impact you want to make and then reverse engineering how AI is able to make that happen. How do you approach actually maximizing the impact of AI as opposed to utilizing it as a trend?
I always say use the right tool based on the job. And you don't need to use AI for everything. I remember this was probably like 15 years ago. We're building out the IBM Watson ecosystem, and a person approached me and said, I have a great idea for a startup company using AI. I'm like, okay. He's like, what if, like, you're working on your car and you need to replace the spark plugs. And you can ask the AI, like, how do I do this for, my Ford Mustang 2010, blah, blah, blah. And it pulls up the right video and plays it for you. I'm like, you could do that, or you could just use the search bar on YouTube, right?
Right.
You don't need to use AI for everything. That's
Mhm.
that's the thing. And that's, I think, what people do is that they're trying to, we're looking at automation so much, like, where can I just plug in AI, whether it adds value or not? And what they're finding is two things. Is one, they've tried to build a Ferrari when all they needed was, a Yugo.
Yeah.
And, interesting, like in document intelligence, I hear from a lot of people now is like they're trying to use LLMs for this stuff, and they're like, my accuracy is down and my costs are way up. In fact, it's more costly to do this with AI than it does with manual labor at this point. And it's like,
Mhm.
well, why would you need to do some of these things? If your document intelligence, you have all these standardized forms, you already know what the fields are. Why would you just use traditional OCR?
Mhm.
Right? For the more unstructured thing, like things that are written as paragraphs, you probably should leverage AI there. They're like, oh, we shouldn't just do everything. Right tool for the right job. The second thing is if you have flaws in your process, AI will amplify them. I was talking about people, process, technology. They're all interlinked. You change one, it triggers changes the other two.
Mhm.
And a lot of people, they have flawed processes and they know it. They have all these workarounds. It's like AI is just going to amplify the issues around that.
Mhm.
So if you want to
Excellent.
get value, you have to fix the process.
Right. It doesn't matter what tools you use if you're not solving an actual problem that's actually relevant and this process is not set up properly, then obviously even if you apply AI to it, it's not going to have an effective outcome. Great point. Now, we were talking before the podcast started even that you have a book especially on this topic about how to navigate this world with AI coming in, how that impacts business. Tell me a little bit more about the book and the thesis behind it.
So the book I'm specifically talking about, because I have a couple,
Mhm.
is called "The Innovative Leadership in the Age of AI," and it's effectively, it shares a lot of best practices and a framework on how you should actually lead people, lead initiatives in a time when we have rapid change thanks to emerging technology like AI. And some of it is very counterintuitive to what we traditionally know.
Mhm.
And that's been an eye opener for a lot of existing leaders who have read the book. But it's been a great primer for people that are new into leadership and management. You know,
Mhm.
for all of those of you that are new and hoping to make that career step into it, you have a huge superpower you don't realize. You have all this, institutionalized knowledge us old fogies do, right? So you
Mhm.
get to start with a clean slate, and you have actually a much better standing as a result.
Right. Excellent. So what I'll do now is go ahead and I want to go ahead and go over a little bit more about you on the personal side, and then we'll go ahead and have a quick fitness segment and conclude the podcast from there. The main question I have for you, or one of the main questions I have for you, is what is something about you or your life that you wish more people knew about?
I don't know if that there's anything like that anymore. My profile's become so public, but
Okay.
something I wish I knew, think that they knew is, um,
It's a hard question
I,
still.
it's a tough question. I'm not sure it's something that necessarily people don't know, but they don't accept. It's probably the better way to put it. Is that there's no panacea here. There's no magic bullet. I get a lot of people just wondering, like, how come AI doesn't solve? Why doesn't AI solve like climate change? I do all this work with the United Nations. Why doesn't it solve climate change? Why doesn't it solve poverty? Why doesn't it solve hunger? And it's like, again, AI can only do what we've taught it to do. So one, we don't know ourselves how to solve these big problems, but two, we have a big complex problem. You don't solve it all at once. You do it kind of in
Right.
piecemeal. You tack it. The old adage, how do you eat an elephant in small bites?
Mhm.
That's what you want to do. But I found that you have to create that culture and mindset from people to do that, because there are things we do in our everyday lives that will actually help, you know, small tackle these problems. But because we think it's not really making a big difference, we don't. And we need a little more visibility. I always believe that, micro actions add up into big changes.
Right.
You think about
Right.
those water bottle filling stations. I love they have a counter on there, because as you're filling it up, you see, like, wow, we've saved 2 million plastic bottles this month. It's not just me, it's the whole community. That's
Yeah.
what I really wish more people knew about me, and would accept what they want to do for their own communities and organizations.
Excellent. What do you think is the biggest difference between you in your 20s and you now?
Oh man, there's so much stuff. But if I have to pick one, I think it's that
Okay.
I hate to say it this way, I'm more accepting, right? In my 20s, you really want to change the world. You're like, why don't people get it? You're trying to persuade. And today, I just understand that it's hard to get people to move. Most people just don't
Mhm.
like change. And I'm not
Right.
saying it's impossible, but if you can't find the right emotional trigger, they're never going to buy into it.
Right.
And sometimes you have
Right.
to just accept that some people are just they're going to be that way. So
Mhm.
don't waste your time and effort. Focus on people that want to make a difference.
Good point. Yeah. So what I'll do now is go ahead and share a very concise perspective regarding health and fitness, and we'll go and conclude the podcast with Neil's plans for this year. The main perspective I just want to provide today is one about mainly being time efficient, and the biggest problem I can see is the adherence component. As you know, any kind of goal you want to pursue, if you don't adhere to the process over time, you're not ever going to get to that end goal. So the biggest problem I can see is if you're someone that has constant meetings to attend to, if you're traveling, the ability to adhere to a traditional approach where you have to go to a gym or a specific location and exercise is far more difficult to adhere to. So instead of focusing on something you have to make time for and shift your entire schedule around for, focus on something that's adapted to your schedule, something that can actually adapt to where you go and what you're doing. Specifically, what I would recommend is something that's location independent, something you can do anytime, anywhere. And one thing I personally will keep talking about is leveraging step count, because that's something you can do while you're literally listening to our podcast right now, something you can do while you're traveling. And anywhere there's ground underneath you, you can essentially do it, which I'm assuming is 99.9% of the time, right? So that's the idea, making it adaptable to your schedule. And of course, there's a specific amount of step count you have to do, but that is far more easier to adhere to than something you have to shift your entire schedule around for. So that's the idea. Focus on something that can actually adapt to your schedule and something you can actually adhere to. And this is actually what I personally use to lose over 70 pounds and actually keep it off. So hopefully it gives a different perspective to what is traditionally being told and a new perspective potentially. So hopefully that was valuable. What we'll do now is go ahead and conclude the fitness conversation and go ahead and move on to Neil's plans for this year. So Neil, tell me a little bit more about what's in store for you this year.
Well, I mean, one of the big things is, I've been serving as United Nations AI advisor for a decade now, and we've
Mhm.
actually reached a point where the member nations have agreed to effectively sit down and hash through some sort of shared guidelines and principles around using emerging technology, particularly AI, which,
Mhm.
I know it sounds very government-ish, but it's actually a huge step in coming to, a world agreement because for several years now, I've been saying, we talk about ethical AI and all these things, but what does that actually mean? Everyone has a different moral standard, and for us, it can be very visceral. So having a baseline that we all agree to is a very difficult thing to do. It's a very difficult people thing to do. But this is a
Mhm.
huge step in the right direction, and I suspect it'll probably lead to what we need the most, which is a UN agency just focused on the governance of science and technology because
Mhm.
things are just moving so much faster than we can react to. We have to get into the mindset of being proactive rather than reactive.
Right. So Neil, where's the best place to learn about you? Is LinkedIn the best place to learn about you?
I mean, I publish a lot on LinkedIn, and you can always follow me on social media. But if you really want to see what I'm up to and see all the resources I like to share with people, you go to my website. It's just
Okay.
neilsahota.com. And if you're wondering how you can leverage AI, check out my book, the AI Activation Code. It's available on Amazon, and the website is aiactivationcode.com. A lot of leaders and have actually said it's a great tactical playbook for non-technical managers and leaders.
Love it. Well, thank you, Neil, for coming on the podcast. It was a pleasure to have you on. This is Aryan Mohindra and Neil Sahota. Thank you.